The first thing the class learned that morning was that Professor Varric had lied about the cage being locked. I was standing in the third observation row of Beast Hall when the warning lights turned red and the Carvox stepped out before the lecture had officially begun. Not broke out. Not escaped. Stepped out. Like it had been invited. Beast Hall was the pride of the Xenobiology Combat Academy, a circular chamber 200 feet wide, built from black alloy, impact glass, and institutional overconfidence. Every alien cadet in that room had signed 3 safety waivers just to attend the demonstration, and even then, half of them had chosen seats behind the reinforced barrier. That was reasonable. The Carvox was 9 feet at the shoulder, covered in dark ridge plates, with a low rumbling breath that made the floor vibrate through my boots. It was not the largest predator in the Academy collection, but it was the one even senior instructors avoided naming casually. Its species did not hunt by anger. It hunted by patience. That made it educational, according to Professor Varric, which was how professors described terrifying decisions when they had tenure. Varric stood beside the open containment gate wearing his silver teaching mantle, all 4 arms folded, his pale green eyes bright, with the smug confidence of someone who believed he controlled the most dangerous thing in the room. Behind him, the Carvox lowered its head and scraped one claw across the training floor. The sound made 20 cadets move backward at once. A Threxian girl dropped her data slate. A pair of Morvani brothers stopped whispering prayers and started breathing them. Even Vorin, the loudest cadet in our cohort, suddenly found great interest in the ceiling. Then there was Caleb Brooks. Human male, 26 years old, 6 feet tall if he stood perfectly straight. White skin, brown hair, gray academy transfer jacket. No horns, no scales, no defensive plates, no visible evolutionary argument for confidence. He stood near the front row with his hands in his pockets, looking at the Carvox the way Americans look at a large dog behind a fence and wonder whether it is friendly or just busy. That should have been funny. At first, it was. Someone behind me whispered, "The Earth boy is going to faint." Another cadet clicked her mandibles and said, "Humans think hiking is survival training." The laughter spread softly, safely, from behind the barrier. Professor Varric let it happen. He enjoyed humiliation when it supported the lesson plan. Then he raised one hand, and the room quieted. "Students," he said, "today we discuss the difference between courage and biology. Courage is a story weak species tell themselves. Biology is the truth that survives contact." He gestured toward the beast ring, a glowing circle in the center of the hall. The Carvox paced along its edge, each step slow enough to feel personal. Varric smiled. "Who among you can enter the ring and face my beast?" Nobody moved. Not Vorin. Not the Morvani brothers. Not the senior exchange cadet who claimed his homeworld trained children with storm lions. Every eye lowered. Every throat went still. The silence grew thick, awkward, and deliciously honest. Then a human hand rose from the front row. Caleb Brooks did not raise it high. He did not stand on a chair. He just lifted his hand like he was asking a question in a community college class. Varric stared at him. The whole hall stared at him. The Carvox stopped pacing. Caleb looked at the professor and said, "Do I need permission, or was that an actual question?" For one long second, nobody believed the human had spoken. That was the problem with Caleb Brooks. He did not sound brave. Brave would have been easier to dismiss. Brave shakes. Brave shouts. Brave tries to fill the room before the room swallows it. Caleb sounded mildly inconvenienced, like Professor Varric had asked for volunteers to move folding chairs after a school assembly. The cadets noticed. Varric noticed. The Carvox noticed most of all. Its heavy head turned toward Caleb, and the low rumble in its chest faded into something quieter, sharper, more focused. Around me, the laughter came back, but thinner this time, stretched over nerves. Vorin pushed away from the wall with a grin wide enough to show all his polished teeth. He was a Sarnak Ridgeborn, nearly 7 feet tall. Blue-gray skin, plated knuckles, and the kind of academy popularity that comes from being loud before being useful. He stepped into Caleb's path before the human could move toward the beast ring. "Easy there, Earth boy," Vorin said, raising both hands as if calming a pet. The professor asked who could face the beast, not who wanted a dramatic way to leave school early. A few cadets laughed again. Caleb looked at him. Just looked. Vorin leaned closer, enjoying the audience. What exactly are you going to do in there? Talk to it about feelings? Offer it a sandwich? Humans love sandwiches, right? Caleb glanced past him at the Carvox, then back at Vorin. Depends on the sandwich. That earned a few confused clicks from the back row, which made Vorin's grin twitch. He did not like jokes he was not winning. He placed one broad hand against Caleb's shoulder, not hard enough to be called an attack, just enough to remind everyone who was supposed to move and who was supposed to be moved. Caleb did not move. Not an inch. Vorin pressed again. The human remained exactly where he was, hands still relaxed. Weight settled through his feet like he had roots under the floor. Vorin's expression changed from amused to annoyed. He pushed harder. Caleb shifted half a step, not backward, but sideways, so cleanly that Vorin's own pressure carried him past the spot where the human had been. Vorin stumbled, caught himself on the barrier rail, and stood there blinking while the front row made the dangerous mistake of going silent. Caleb adjusted the shoulder of his gray jacket. You should be careful with momentum, he said. It keeps receipts. Someone made a choking sound. It might have been laughter. It might have been fear arriving early. Professor Varric's eyes narrowed. Enough, he said. His voice snapped across Beast Hall like a closing door. Cadet Brooks, you are not required to continue this performance. Your species has no shame in withdrawal. Caleb turned toward him. My species has plenty of shame. We just usually earn it first. Varric's mouth tightened. You have no claws, no armor, no venom, no natural intimidation display. Against a Carvox, courage without biology is just noise. Caleb looked at the glowing beast ring. The Carvox paced along its edge now, watching him with the stillness of a storm deciding where to land. Then Caleb said, running is useful when something is worth chasing. Nobody laughed that time. The professor slowly lifted one hand toward the control panel, and the ring lights brightened from blue to white. The entry gate opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. Caleb stepped forward, past Vorin, past the staring cadets, past every sensible instinct in the room. The Carvox lowered its head. Caleb did not lower his eyes. And that was when I realized the most uncomfortable thing about humans was not that they were fearless. It was that they treated fear like weather. Annoying, measurable, and absolutely not a reason to cancel the day. The moment Caleb crossed the entry line, the beast ring sealed behind him with a clean white pulse. It was not a wall exactly. It was worse. A low-energy boundary rose from the floor, transparent enough for every cadet to see his face, solid enough to remind him that leaving was no longer a casual option. Professor Varric stepped to the teaching platform and let the silence stretch. He loved silence when he owned it. The Carvox stood 30 feet away from Caleb, shoulders rolling under dark ridge plates, its breath moving through the hall in slow waves. Caleb glanced once at the boundary, once at the floor markings, then at the professor. Rules? He asked. Varric smiled like he had been waiting for that question. A wise inquiry, Cadet Brooks. The rules are simple. You may not use lethal weapons. You may not request outside assistance. You may not climb the barrier. You may not strike the containment nodes. You may yield verbally at any time before contact. If the beast forces you outside the inner circle, you fail. If you remain inside the circle for 2 minutes, you pass. If you gain control of the engagement, you earn advanced evaluation. Vorin laughed from the front row, though he sounded less certain than before. Advanced evaluation? For him? Varric did not look away from Caleb. For any creature foolish enough to attempt it. The professor lifted a remote device shaped like a thin silver rod. The Carvox responded immediately, lowering its head and turning one massive paw against the floor. That was when I understood the lesson was not only about the beast. It was about obedience. Varric wanted the class to see a hierarchy. Professor above predator. Predator above student. Biology above courage. Human at the bottom, where the academy thought soft things belonged. Caleb noticed the remote too. His eyes flicked to it for less than a second, then returned to the Carvox. Does that thing tell it what to do? He asked. Varric's expression sharpened. It provides behavioral guidance. Caleb nodded slowly. Right. A leash with better branding. A few cadets made small, involuntary sounds. Not laughter. Surprise trying not to become laughter. Varric's jaw tightened. You are standing in a controlled academic environment. Human. Do not mistake restraint for safety. Caleb took 2 slow steps toward the center marker. I grew up in Colorado, Professor. We have mountain roads with fewer guardrails than this. The comment meant almost nothing to the class, but the tone did. That easy earth tone. That casual American confidence that made danger sound like bad weather and bad weather sound like a weekend story. Varric raised the silver rod. The ring lights dimmed. The floor projected Caleb's biometric readings above the arena in blue text. Heart rate elevated but stable. Breathing controlled. Stress response present. Panic response absent. The last line caused the room to shift. Panic response absent. That was not supposed to happen. Every species had a panic response near a Carvox. Even trained handlers showed micro-tremors. Caleb just rolled his shoulders, bent his knees slightly, and kept his hands open. The beast began to circle. Not charging. Not roaring. Circling. Its eyes stayed fixed on Caleb's center mass, measuring weight, balance, movement, all the things predators read before committing to action. Caleb turned with it, never crossing his feet, never letting his back face the animal, never staring too hard. That last part mattered. Direct challenge could provoke. Looking away could invite. Caleb chose a third option, calm attention without panic. Varric spoke to the class, but his eyes stayed on the human. Observe how the Carvox tests weakness. It seeks fear first. The body tells the truth before the mind can lie. Caleb heard him and gave the smallest smile. Then this might take a while, he said. The Carvox stopped circling. Its head lowered another inch. Varric's thumb pressed the silver rod. The first charge began. The Carvox crossed 30 feet so quickly that half the class screamed before the beast reached the center marker. That was the first thing I learned about humans that day. Their eyes were not the most advanced in the galaxy. Their ears were not special. Their skin was embarrassingly exposed. But somehow Caleb Brooks saw the charge before the rest of us finished reacting to it. He did not jump backward. That would have put him near the boundary. He did not freeze. That would have made him a lesson. He moved one step to the side and slightly forward, cutting across the angle instead of away from it. The Carvox swept past him with a rush of heat and muscle, close enough to make his gray transfer jacket snap in the wind. Its shoulder missed him by maybe 3 inches. Maybe less. The front row slammed against the safety barrier as if distance had suddenly become a valuable academic resource. Caleb turned with the beast, staying balanced, eyes on its front legs rather than its teeth. That bothered me. Most students watched the mouth because the mouth looked dangerous. Caleb watched the feet because the feet decided where danger would be next. The Carvox skidded near the far side of the inner circle, claws scraping bright lines across the training floor without breaking it. It spun back faster than anything that size had a right to spin. Professor Varric lifted his chin, satisfaction returning to his face. Excellent. Observe the recovery speed. The first pass creates fear. The second creates failure. Caleb glanced at him. You put that on the midterm? Varric's eyes narrowed, but the class did not laugh. They were too busy realizing Caleb had spoken while still facing the beast. The Carvox advanced again, slower this time. Head low, shoulders rolling, learning him. That was the terrifying part. A Carvox was not a wild brute. It adjusted. It studied. It punished repeated mistakes. Caleb did not give it the same movement twice. When it stepped left, he angled right. When it lowered its head, he widened his stance. When it paused, he paused too, refusing to feed it panic. The creature lunged suddenly, not a full charge this time, but a short snapping rush meant to make him flinch into the wrong place. Caleb leaned back just enough that its head passed in front of him, then turned his hips and let the momentum carry the beast beyond his center line. No strike. No dramatic counter. Just absence. The human made himself unavailable. Vorin whispered behind the barrier. He is guessing. I wanted to believe that. Everyone wanted to believe that. Guessing meant luck, and luck eventually runs out. But Caleb's face did not look lucky. It looked focused. Annoyingly focused. Like a man trying to parallel park in downtown Denver while a truck honked behind him. The biometric display betrayed him in the worst possible way. Heart rate elevated. Breathing stable. Panic response absent. Again, Varric's silver rod twitched in his hand. The professor was beginning to dislike his own data. The Carvox circled tighter, cutting Caleb's space down inch by inch. The inner ring was only 40 feet across, and the beast owned most of it by size alone. Caleb backed toward the edge, and a nervous wave passed through the hall. 5 feet from the boundary. 4. 3. The Carvox lowered its head for the push that would end the trial. Caleb looked at the line behind him. then at the beast, and smiled like he had just found the only useful door in the room. Caleb did not use the edge to escape. He used it to make the Carvox predictable. That was the second thing I learned about humans that day. Most species treat a boundary like a warning. Humans treat it like a tool somebody forgot to charge for. The beast lowered its head, powerful shoulders bunching under dark ridge plates, ready to drive him out of the inner circle and end the demonstration in front of everyone. Professor Varick's mouth curved with satisfaction. Voren leaned forward against the barrier, already preparing whatever clever insult would make him feel tall again. Caleb waited until the Carvox committed its weight. Not early. Early would have been fear. Not late. Late would have been academic paperwork. He moved at the exact ugly moment when the beast could still see him, but could no longer change direction. One foot touched the boundary line. His shoulder turned. His left hand brushed the beast's ridge plate. Not pushing, not striking, just guiding. Then he stepped through the narrow space beside its neck like he had slipped through a closing subway door. The Carvox surged past him and stopped 1 inch before the energy boundary, its own momentum forcing it to brace hard. The ring lights flickered. Caleb was already behind its shoulder. He did not celebrate. He did not look at the class. He placed 2 fingers against the side of the beast's upper foreleg, right where the joint shifted under the armor plates. The Carvox froze. Not from pain. From surprise. Predators hate being touched where balance lives. Caleb stepped away before it could turn. The beast swung around, but now its rhythm was different. Cautious. Irritated. Curious. That last one mattered. Varick noticed it too, and his grip tightened around the silver control rod. The professor wanted fear. Caleb was giving the beast a puzzle. The Carvox lunged again, shorter and sharper, testing whether the human would repeat the same trick. Caleb did not. He dropped his weight, pivoted under the angle, and let the rush pass close enough to stir dust against his shoes. Then he tapped the opposite side of the same foreleg. Again, the beast checked itself. Again, Caleb was gone before the reaction finished. The class stopped breathing in pieces. First the back row, then the front, then Voren, whose mouth stayed open with nothing useful coming out. The biometric display updated. Heart rate controlled. Breathing steady. Panic response absent. Motor prediction accuracy rising. I had never seen that line before. Neither had Varick. He turned toward the console as if the machine had offended him personally. Caleb circled now, not running, not retreating, just staying at the edge of the Carvox's choices. The beast tried to hurt him left. Caleb went right before the pressure arrived. It tried to pause and draw him in. Caleb paused too. It tried a sudden shoulder feint. Caleb smiled faintly and did not move at all. The Carvox stopped. Its low rumble faded into silence. For the first time, the beast was not asking where the prey would run. It was asking what the human knew. Professor Varick spoke, but his voice had lost its shine. Cadet Brooks, you are delaying failure. Caleb kept his eyes on the beast. No, Professor, he said. I am teaching it not to waste energy. That was when the Carvox took one slow step backward. Not away in fear. Away in respect for distance. The hall went completely still. The beast had adjusted to Caleb. Worse, it had begun listening to him. That single step backward did something no formal lecture had ever done. It made the entire class question the food chain. We had been trained since our first academy cycle to believe predators moved forward. Always forward. Retreat belonged to prey, to injured things, to students who discovered too late that confidence and competence were not relatives. But the Carvox did not retreat like prey. It adjusted like a professional. It gave Caleb Brooks space because it had learned that space around a human was not empty. It was organized. Professor Varick saw the same thing, and for the first time that morning, his teaching smile disappeared completely. The silver control rod clicked once in his hand. The Carvox's head lifted, its dark eyes narrowing as the signal reached whatever part of its training still obeyed the professor. Caleb noticed the change immediately. His expression did not harden. It cooled. There is a difference. Hard as anger. Cool as calculation. The beast circled right, then stopped when Caleb shifted left before the movement finished. It tried to lower its shoulders, but Caleb's hand rose slightly, palm open, not touching, not threatening, just marking the distance. The Carvox paused again. That pause traveled through Beast Hall like a power outage. Voren whispered, "It is waiting for him." Nobody corrected him. We were all too busy realizing he was right. Caleb spoke softly, but the arena microphones caught every word. Easy. The translator rendered it into 6 species dialects, though none of them carried the human tone properly. It was not a command barked from above. It was not begging. It was the voice of someone who had calmed frightened horses, nervous dogs, lost hikers, and probably more dangerous things on Earth that humans had given friendly names to avoid admitting they were insane. The Carvox breathed out through its nostrils, a deep rumble that shook dust from the floor grooves. Varric's thumb pressed harder against the rod. The beast flinched, not from pain, but from conflict. That was when the lesson broke. Everyone saw it. The professor was not guiding behavior. He was forcing obedience. Caleb's eyes left the Carvox for the first time and settled on Varric. "Professor," he said, "you are making it worse." A collective gasp moved through the hall. Students did not correct Varric. Assistant instructors did not correct Varric. Visiting officials barely disagreed with Varric unless they enjoyed career problems. Varric stepped closer to the platform rail, his pale green eyes sharp with insult. "You presume to understand a Class 5 Academy predator after 90 seconds? Caleb looked back at the beast. "No, I understand pressure." That answer hit harder than arrogance because it was not trying to impress anyone. The Carvox lunged again, but this time the movement was wrong. Too sharp, too forced, not the smooth patience from earlier. Caleb saw the broken rhythm and moved inside the safe angle, guiding the beast past him with a touch so light it looked impossible from the stance. The Carvox stumbled to a stop near the far arc of the ring, not defeated, just confused by its own body. The biometric display updated again. Human stress level stable. Beast agitation rising. Handler interference detected. Varric froze. The system had called him out in front of his own class. Caleb stood between the professor and the Carvox now, shoulders relaxed, breathing steady, one hand still open toward the beast. The room had stopped seeing a foolish human volunteer. We were seeing something older than Academy rankings. A creature from a planet where survival did not mean being the strongest thing in the forest. It meant reading the forest before the forest read you. The Carvox lowered its head slightly, not bowing, not submitting, but listening. Caleb took one slow step toward it. Varric lifted the rod again, and for the first time, the beast looked away from Caleb and stared at the professor. Varric made his mistake because he believed authority and control were the same thing. They are not. Authority is when the room listens because it respects you. Control is when the room obeys because you are holding the only button. The Carvox had obeyed that button for years, and Professor Varric had mistaken obedience for loyalty. Caleb Brooks had been in the beast ring for less than 2 minutes, and somehow the animal had already learned the difference. The professor raised the silver rod higher, making sure every cadet could see it. His voice cut through the hall with polished academic anger. "This demonstration is not about emotion, Cadet Brooks. It is about dominant structure. The beast responds to superior command." Caleb did not take his eyes off the Carvox. "No, Professor," he said quietly. "It responds to pressure because you never gave it a choice." That sentence landed badly. Not loudly. Badly. You could feel it hit every instructor, every cadet, every safety officer watching from behind the glass. Varric's pale green eyes narrowed until they looked like slits cut into stone. He pressed the rod again. The Carvox twitched, its ridge plates lifting along its back, but it did not move forward immediately. That hesitation was tiny. Half a breath. Maybe less. But in Beast Hall, half a breath was enough to rewrite a reputation. Varric pressed again. The beast stepped sideways instead of charging. The class murmured. Vorin looked from the professor to the human and back again, suddenly unsure which one was supposed to be dangerous. Caleb lowered his voice. "Easy." The Carvox's head turned toward him, drawn by that calm sound in the middle of all the artificial commands. Varric saw it and snapped. "Override protocol," he said. The platform console flashed amber. The ring lights sharpened. The Carvox shuddered, then launched forward with a forced speed that lacked its earlier grace. This was not hunting anymore. This was panic wearing a professor's instructions. Caleb moved at the last possible moment, not away from the beast, but across its line. He gave it somewhere safer to go. That was the part one still think about. Most cadets would have tried to beat the charge. Caleb solved it. He stepped inside the arc, turned his shoulders, and guided the Carvox past the center of the ring without challenging its body or pride. The beast stopped near the boundary, breathing hard, confused but unharmed. Varric's face darkened. He tapped the rod twice more. Caleb turned toward him then, and the entire room felt the temperature change. Not from rage, from decision. "Professor," Caleb said, "if you keep pulling on that leash, it is going to stop trusting the leash." Varric laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You think it trusts you?" Caleb looked back at the Carvox. "I think it trusts the person not making it stupid." The front row went silent so fast it felt mechanical. Varric stepped down from the teaching platform and approached the ring boundary himself. That was not standard. Professors did not enter active demonstrations unless something had gone academically, politically, or financially wrong. This was becoming all three. He keyed a command into the silver rod, and a narrow opening formed in the energy boundary. Varric stepped through wearing that silver mantle like armor and pride stitched together. The Carvox saw him enter and lowered its head, not in respect this time, but in warning. Varric ignored it. His attention was fixed on Caleb. "You have confused hesitation for victory, human." Caleb stood between him and the beast, hands open, body loose, eyes steady. "No," he said. "I am just the only one in here paying attention." Varric moved first, fast for a professor, faster than anyone expected from someone who spent more time grading than sparring. He reached toward Caleb's shoulder in a formal dominance grip, the kind instructors used to end challenges without calling them fights. Caleb shifted 1 inch. Varric's hand caught empty air. Caleb stepped around him, calm as a man avoiding a slow shopper in a grocery aisle. The professor turned, insulted. The Carvox rumbled behind them. And for the first time, the class understood the demonstration had changed. It was no longer human against beast. It was human and beast both deciding whether the professor still deserved the room. The Carvox did not roar after Varric missed Caleb. That silence frightened me more than any sound it had made all morning. Predators roar when they want the room to know what they are feeling. The Carvox had moved past feelings. It stood behind Caleb with its head low, eyes fixed on the silver rod in the professor's hand, breathing slow enough to make every inhale feel counted. Varric sensed the shift and tried to recover the only way pride knows how. He straightened his silver mantle, lifted his chin, and spoke to the class as though this disaster still belonged in a lesson plan. "Observe the human tactic," he said. "Distraction, improvisation, emotional projection onto a trained animal. None of this changes hierarchy." Caleb turned slightly, keeping the professor in front of him and the Carvox within view. That was the human detail that stayed with me. He did not turn his back on either threat. Not because he was afraid. Because respect and caution looked very similar on Earth. Varric pressed the control rod again. The device gave off a sharp pulse of light. The Carvox's muscles tightened, but its feet stayed planted. A murmur moved through the hall. The professor pressed harder. Another pulse. The beast lowered its head another inch, not obeying, not attacking, simply enduring a command it no longer believed in. Caleb's voice dropped. "Look at me." The translator caught the words, but not the weight underneath them. The Carvox's eyes shifted from the rod to the human. Caleb raised one hand, palm down, slow and steady. Not reaching, not pleading, marking the air between them. "Easy," he said. "No one breathes fast unless they have to." The beast exhaled. A long, deep sound rolled through the floor, and half the class stepped back from a creature that was no longer moving. That was the absurd part. The Carvox became more intimidating when it stopped. Caleb took one step. Toward it. Varric snapped, "Cadet Brooks, step away from the specimen." Caleb did not look at him. "It is not a specimen. It is trying to decide if you are worth ignoring." The words were soft. The damage was not. Varric's face hardened, and he advanced with the rod extended, trying to move around Caleb and re-establish command distance. Caleb shifted with him, not blocking aggressively, just occupying the line between the professor and the beast. Every step Varric took, Caleb matched. Left, right, forward. Still calm, still open-handed. It looked less like combat and more like a man preventing an angry tourist from walking into traffic. That comparison would have insulted Varric deeply, which is probably why I enjoyed it. The professor finally raised one arm to push past him. Caleb moved first. Not a strike, not a dramatic takedown. He simply caught Varric's wrist, turned it gently but decisively, and angled the silver rod away from the Carvox. The control pulse fired harmlessly into the floor. The ring lights flickered. The Carvox did not move. Varric froze. Caleb released him immediately and stepped back. The message was clear enough for every species in the room. He could have done more. He chose not to. Then Caleb faced the beast fully and lowered his hand until his palm hovered a few inches above its muzzle. The Carvox stared at him. The room vanished around that stare. No professor. No cadets. No lecture. Just one creature raised by pressure, and another creature finally offered a choice. Slowly, impossibly, the Carvox lowered its head beneath Caleb's hand. Not conquered. Not broken. Recognizing. The biometric display flashed white. Hostility decreasing. Independent compliance detected. Professor command influence rejected. Beast Hall went so quiet I heard Vorin whisper, "No way." Caleb gently touched the ridge above the Carvox's brow. Then the beast turned, stepped beside him, and faced Professor Varric. For a moment, Professor Varric looked less like a master of predators and more like a man who had misplaced the floor. The Carvox stood beside Caleb Brooks, massive head lowered, dark ridge plates rising and falling with slow breaths, no longer facing the students, no longer facing the open gate, but facing the professor who had spent years calling control of science. The silver rod remained in Varric's hand. It looked very small now. That was the funny thing about tools. They seem powerful until everyone realizes the power was borrowed. Varric lifted the rod one final time, and the whole hall seemed to lean away from the decision. Caleb did not. He only said, "I would not do that." Not loud, not threatening, just honest, like warning someone the stove was still hot. Varric's pride did the predictable thing. It ignored good advice. His thumb pressed the command stud. The rod flashed amber. The Carvox did not obey. It did not lunge. It did not roar. It simply stepped forward one pace and placed itself fully between Caleb and the professor. The biometric display changed from white to gold. Independent Guardian response detected. Beast Ring authority transferred. The words floated above the arena in letters large enough for every cadet to read, and I watched Professor Varric's reputation lose balance before his body did. He took one step back. Caleb took one step forward. The Carvox moved with him. Not ahead. Not behind. With him. That tiny detail emptied the room of arrogance. Varric tried to recover by turning toward the class. "This is a temporary behavioral anomaly," he said, but his voice had lost the polished edge. Caleb tilted his head. "Back home, we call that trust." Vorin, still behind the barrier, whispered something I could not hear, but his face had changed completely. He was no longer looking at Caleb like a joke. He was looking at him the way students look at a final exam they forgot to study for. Varric suddenly stepped toward Caleb, arm reaching out in that formal instructor grip meant to end a challenge without admitting it was a challenge. Caleb moved with the same calm timing he had shown all morning. One hand guided the professor's wrist aside. One foot shifted. One shoulder turned. Varric's own momentum carried him down to one knee on the training floor, not harmed, not humiliated by force, but corrected by physics. The silver rod slid from his hand and stopped at Caleb's shoe. No one spoke. Caleb picked it up, looked at it for half a second, then placed it carefully on the floor out of everyone's reach. The Carvox lowered its head beside him, quiet and steady. Professor Varric stared at the human, then at the beast, then at the class that had just watched the hierarchy flip inside out. The academy system spoke before he could. Advanced evaluation complete. Human candidate Caleb Brooks recognized as dominant stabilizing presence. Beast Hall protocols revised. Instructor supervision pending review. That last line hurt more than any insult could have. Caleb offered Varric a hand. The professor looked at it as if it were a trap. Then, slowly, he accepted. Caleb helped him stand and said, "Good class, Professor." The silence cracked. Not into laughter, into something stranger. Respect arriving late and embarrassed. From that day on, nobody at the academy asked whether a human could face a beast. That question had become outdated. The new question was whether the beast was smart enough to recognize the human first. Because the Carvox had understood what the rest of us had missed. Earth did not make humans fearless. Earth made them fluent in fear. And when a creature speaks fear that well, even monsters listen.